Okay, I guess I'm live, and this is Elliot Fishman, straight here. And welcome to Wednesday. This is our vodcast. Today's January 3rd, 2018. So this is surely going to be our first vodcast of the new year, and I hope everybody had a pleasant new year. You can see I'm wearing my Hopkins fleece here. No tie. I'm on academics today. We have our Felix meetings. I'm doing 3Ds in my office, but it's just really cold, and those of you on the East Coast especially know it's not often we see single-digit numbers and just incredible cold. And from what people tell me, it's going to get colder and nastier, and it's going to snow. So that actually is a good segue for me to tell you that February 16th to 19th in Orlando, we're having our course. It's an incredible course, but the other thing, it's warm. I know Florida this week for a couple of days is going to go to 50s, but we'll be back in the 70s and 80s by the weekend. So in 6 weeks when we get there, it'll be spectacular. So sign up now and help support us. Anyway, I was trying to think about what to speak about, and Rachel suggested that I speak a little bit about cinematic rendering. And what I thought I would do is maybe expand it beyond cinematic rendering into just 3D in general, and maybe this will be a good way to start the new year. I have to give a talk at the LA Radiological Society in about 2.5 weeks looking at the future of radiology, say in 2025. And I was trying to think about what things are in the future, and I always think about the same thing is post-processing, visualization, and the like, that as scanners get better and better, most people still are focusing on looking at images on the axial plane, and that's just something that seems bizarre to me. And we've written about it, we've spoken about it. There are many lectures on CT as Us. There are many lectures that you could see on our Facebook page that talk about rendering and post-processing. But it always brings me back to the question to ask is, why is the transition so slow? And in fact, I'm going to speak about, I'm going to record a lecture on an exhibit I did at RSNA, which is called What a Long Strange Trip It's Been. We won a cum laude award. But when you look at a 30-year period of time where you went from reconstructions on a Pixar computer, which took 25 hours, to reconstructions on my iPhone, which take less than a second, obviously the better quality, the flexibility, the ability to use a data set, all of those only mean something if people actually do use it. And so whether it's volume rendering in classic form, whether it's MIP, whether it's curved planar reconstruction, it's just a question of, are people going to use it? Now, I've mentioned before that perhaps as radiology, and I don't know how we're going to do this, you can read about it, you hear about it from the ACR, goes from a basis of doing a volume to value, okay? It's very hard to measure value because I think I'm a far better radiologist than you are, and I should get paid more, but then you think you're better than that person, and you think what you do is more important. And it gets into this basically dog chasing its tail type process, which doesn't work very well. I kind of am concerned that perhaps maybe this time the post-processing will become important. I think also when you think about this value over volume, that also may be the explanation why deep learning will be of value, that unless you use deep learning, which we know will be really good across a range of applications, you're not going to be doing radiology as well as you could, and perhaps you're not going to get paid as much or paid at all if you're not using deep learning, particularly when the algorithms get more sophisticated, to be able to do imaging. So that takes us full circle back to what I started with, and what about cinematic rendering? So cinematic rendering is kind of interesting. It's becoming available this year. It's been used in a few test centers, and there's been a few articles written, and we've been writing a bunch of articles. Steve Rowe, Linda Chu, and the like, Pam Johnson have been writing a bunch of articles on the topic. When you look at the cinematic renderings, I think no matter who you are, whether you like 3D or not, whether you're a radiologist or just a regular clinician, everyone kind of takes a step back when they see the cinematic and say, wow, that really is cool. So I think from a visual perspective, and I mentioned this before, it reminds me a little bit about the Pixar days when Derek Nye, myself, Bob Drebin, and Hopkins, the Pixar people, were doing the imaging. You kind of notice the oohs and ahs because it was something you didn't expect. And with volume rendering, we've gotten really good. It makes incredible images. I do 50 cases a day, but it's almost like people got spoiled. What can you do for me now? And that's the challenge. And so cinematic rendering may be the newest, greatest thing, maybe for the moment, but I think it does create really spectacular images. Now, I don't think I could, at this point, it's good enough, though it's getting there for me to read directly from the cinematic, and I could read directly off typical volume rendering, though I will always use the axials, coronal, sagittals, and the 3D together. But the cinematic, I look at more as a play for the referring clinicians to be able to show them information that they probably can't appreciate. But I am seeing that it also does help us. For example, we're looking at ductus arteriosus versus focal dissections, and Steve Rowe wrote a paper just accepted to emergency radiology showing how the cinematic rendering can be helpful in that regard. We've been looking at cinematic rendering as part of pancreatic imaging, looking at ways of looking at texture, defining different lesions, whether it's a serous cystadenoma or an MCN or an adenocarcinoma or a neuroendocrine tumor, based on the textures. One of the things you recognize when you do the cinematic is it gives you a lot of texture information. We've been putting a lot of effort the last couple of years on looking at textures, seeing whether textures can be a focus for deep learning to recognize pathology, or how textures can be used to distinguish tumors. And we published on that looking at different liver lesions. We published on that looking at different renal lesions. I think cinematic perhaps can build on top of that and perhaps fit inside a deep learning paradigm. So you got to think about, and we've been thinking a bunch, that for deep learning to work, remember deep learning, people talk about numbers. They don't really talk about visualization and presentation. It's more detection. If you're looking at images, is there a mass present or not? Can you pick up a lung nodule? But I think a lot of the deep learning is gonna be at the edge where you bring together the deep learning information with the visualization. That unless you have visualization built into deep learning is going to suffer because I think both on the understanding of what you're looking at, but also what you need as an output. That output is going to be really focused on the visualization of the information. Now, I know I'm biased and our team is biased on visualization, but whenever you ignore the visualization, you usually find that people tend to fail. That visualization component becomes more and more critical, particularly in complex data sets. People have a way of understanding things better if it's visualized, particularly in 3D. And so I think that's going to be one of the secrets, is the ability to merge the two of them together. There's an article in the Harvard Business Review, January, February 2018 issue, that I just read very quickly yesterday. I think I got it 2 days ago. I'll read it more carefully, but they start off with talking about the disaster between IBM Watson and MD Anderson as they tried to cure a disease or treat patients with deep learning. And they lost millions of dollars, and I think the president of MD Anderson ended up getting fired, and that was in part one of the reasons. The article does make the point that you really need to understand what problem you're looking at and what problem you're trying to solve before you go all in or all out. I think one of the things we need to understand, and we are understanding better, is what do we need to know? What do we need to see? How do you create information that's useful for everyone? And a big part of that becomes visualization. So can we use something like cinematic rendering or some other way of looking at volume rendered data and do it better? If you think about detection of pancreatic masses, You want to know, A, there's a mass present. What does it look like? What is it? What's its orientation? But a lot of that's going to be the texture mapping, because at the end of the spectrum, I think, you're going to then have the computer decide whether it's done laparoscopically or it's done open. It'll need to know where things are in 3D. Is a patient resectable or not? Does the patient need chemotherapy or radiation therapy before they get operated on, or perhaps after they get operated on? What can we expect to find in surgery? How will the vessels look? What kind of approach is necessary? I think all of these things are going to have to be built into that algorithm. I think there's a tendency to think about things at a very, very simplistic form. Now, I have that same problem. We tend to think of things as relatively simple problems and simple solutions without really thinking about a bigger picture approach. And I think one of the things with cinematic, perhaps, that I am thinking about is, how is it that we can use the information in a better format? How can we use the information? How can we quantify the information? How we can display the information? What type of filters do we need to use? What is the algorithms going to look like? I know we talk about black boxes, and perhaps I'm willing to put up with the black box if it gives me incredible information. But I think if we can control that black box, and people in medicine like to understand why they're doing things, not simply goes into a box and it spits out the information and everyone kind of puts up their hands and starts dancing. That's kind of cool, but I think people like the FDA are probably going to want to know a little bit more than just explaining something like you and my grandmother saying, listen, I know the answer. I can't explain why I know the answer, how I know the answer, but I know the answer. That's a really good thing if you're always right. So if you can pick the lottery numbers every day, they're going to build a building after you, or they'll be very wealthy because you'll make a lot of money winning the lottery, then you can build your own building. But unless you're always going to be right, to quote Larry David, it's just not, being right here and there is probably not a strategy. Being right, and there's an old quote about even a broken clock is right twice a day. So being right twice a day is really not anything all that great. 3 times a day, it's a little bit better, but 2 times, no. So I think that one of the things we are doing, and if you look at our Facebook page, or if you look at the Instagram page, and then as you'll see coming up on CT is Us, we are posting a lot of videos looking at cinematic rendering. I kind of try to give you a feel about how we look at things. So when I'm doing things interactively, what am I looking at? We're now able to do the cinematic with real-time rendering without losing the quality. I think you will see more improvements to come, both in quality as well as interactivity. But with what we're able to do now, I do find it interesting how we can really show the information both to referring clinicians as well as to ourselves, as well as to each other from an educational perspective. So I am very excited about that. And I'll try to post, I am doing a reasonable number of cases, probably 20 cases a day, so reasonable number. We're trying to publish, and we're trying to understand, and we're trying to create presets and value. So it's something that you can do. It's interesting to try to do this yourself. So I do have ads on our website that do make the point, and I feel like I'm on one of those guest hosts where I'm having a movie coming out and I'm talking about it. But I think that if you come to our Orlando meeting, Tony Cook and Lauren do hands-on training, and I'll be there, and we'll be doing training on cinematic rendering. So if you want to learn how to do it, it's probably a good time. So that works out very, very nicely. Only 6 weeks away, so hopefully be able to make it. I think that it's probably a good time at the beginning of the year to maybe make a commitment to try to learn something new, try to do something different, try to do something better. This is probably a good thing to do. I think it's a little bit time consumption, but it's not massive. Stop looking at your watch, perhaps, or stop looking up ads on the internet. Stop chasing down Amazon. There's only so many Amazon potato chips or Amazon books you can buy but end up not reading anyway. So instead of goofing around, just look and do some rendering. So that's going to be our advice for the first Wednesday of the new year, is that you really need to think about doing things better, doing things different, and really focusing as we look at a new year. And one of the ways of focusing is perhaps learn cinematic rendering. Now, we do have some questions, and I see you, Scott. Thanks for the HBR article tip. Yeah, it's a great article. January, February is a double issue HBR, Harvard Business Report. If you don't have a subscription, I think you look at their site, you maybe can download part of it. If not, just go to your bookstore, and if you go to Barnes & Noble's, they have it there. You can get a cup of coffee and just read it and then just leave or something like that. What other questions do we see here? I think people are wishing us a Happy New Year. We're wishing everybody Happy New Year as well. So there aren't any questions. We do pity the folks in Buffalo, but Buffalo was always cold. But Buffalo did make the playoffs, so we congratulate them. Though, as usual, I will tell you, New England, Super Bowl 24-14. I'm not sure who they're going to play, but I know they're going to win. Brady is going to win another one. People will complain. They're not going to deflate the ball. Don't sweat it. Anyway, I think that's about it. Since no one has any questions, if you have any questions, you think of them later, just put them online. And if not, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.